The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host, content creators, or the production company.
Welcome to the Foundations of Freedom with Jerome Huyler. A strong, vigorous economy runs on a division of labor. While some produce the goods, others provide the services we, the people, need and want. But behind everything we do, our work, our businesses, our daily lives, are the political decisions our leaders make in our name. Since we elect the men and women who write the laws that create the conditions in which we all prosper or perish, we all need to be fully informed political participants. The silent majority can no longer afford to remain silent. One of the most valuable services a free people require is the clarification of complex social, economic, and political ideas. Other media platforms offer biting commentary on the hot-button headlines of the day. This podcast service will explore the underlying causes of and the effective cures for what ails us. And this nation is ailing. Ultimately, to preserve the American dream, we will have to retrieve the principles that made that dream possible. But there are more pressing issues and concrete decisions to consider. So please stay tuned.
Welcome to the Foundations of Freedom podcast with Jerome Huyler. That's me. I'd like to begin by wishing everyone, all of my viewers, a very happy new year, the best of prosperity and good health to you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry, and Happy New Year to you and to all of our listeners, all of our viewers. Another episode number 18, Foundations of Freedom podcast, titled The Case Against Welfare. In this episode of our podcast, we will examine the explosive allegations of welfare fraud, runaway government spending, and the moral and economic consequences of a system that has quietly grown out of control. Jerome Huyler will make the case that the real crisis is not just fraud. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what our government was meant to be. So for those following the story, it's been widely reported that the state of Minnesota has committed as much as $9 billion in welfare fraud. $9 billion with a B. Federal and state funds earmarked for early learning centers and other children's services were allegedly stolen by who knows how many members of the state's 80 million Somali population. Now, the governor, Tim Walz, and the attorney general, Keith Ellison, have allowed this condition to fester for too many years. They warmly welcomed the overwhelming support and the financial backing that the Somali and other voters in their state contributed to their careers. Many strongly suspect that other states, such as Ohio, Maine, and others, have likewise participated in the theft of the public funds that were earmarked for these child care services. And now some estimates are at $5.2 billion in fraud that have been uncovered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Early investigations suggest that fraud in the SNAP or food stamp program is also rampant throughout the country. Decades of lax oversight have produced massive levels of waste and fraud and abuse in all of the nation's social welfare edifice. All the while, too many pragmatic Americans have asked not whether a course of action is morally sound, but in some cases, can I get away with it? There is no telling how much waste, fraud, and abuse will eventually come to light. And one thing is likely: the investigation into the fraudulent use of public funds promises to be the first and foremost major political story of this new year 2026. What do you conclude from all of this, Jerome?
First, I have to wonder how many Americans actually care about all the money the Treasury is losing and has lost over the last few years. How does it actually impact the man in the street? Why should taxpayers care? You get the question. Why should taxpayers care about all the fraud that is occurring? Here's my answer. Any middle-class family paying upwards of 50% in combined federal, state, local income taxes, property, payroll, sales, Social Security taxes, utility, estate, and capital gains taxes is footing the bill for the financial fraud, waste, and abuse that is taking place in this country. If life has become unaffordable, if young couples today can't afford even a starter home with which to start out their family lives, it is in good part owing to the vast sums that are being taken from them in taxes. And we are now beginning to see that a good part of those sums are financing fraud, waste, and mismanagement. What boggles the mind is that all the revenue government collects is not nearly enough to cover the reckless levels of spending Congress mandates year after year. The country has accumulated a national debt in excess of $38 trillion. We are spending $1 trillion just to retire the annual interest rate on that colossal debt. And we are doing that year after year. And each year, congressional spending exceeds federal tax revenue by roughly $1 trillion. The national debt, in other words, continues to rise year after year. We're leaving a colossal burden of debt to succeeding generations. Your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be paying all their lives for our irresponsible profligacy. The unavoidable fact is that every penny a government spends has got to be financed, either through taxation, through Treasury borrowing, selling bonds, notes, and bills, or by the Federal Reserve creating more money. As for the Federal Reserve, the more money there is in circulation, the less each dollar will be worth. Where there is monetary expansion, debtors can pay off creditors in depreciated currency. It gets cheaper and cheaper each year to settle outstanding debts. And this works for government as well. That's why the ultimate solution for deep indebtedness is monetary creation, and that spells inflation and disaster for any national economy. Now, since the inception of COVID, actually long before that, Washington has been spending wildly, creating new entitlements and giving generous benefits to the nation's needy. All the while, the definition of need expanded and states waived once strict qualifications. Eligibility for public assistance was substantially loosened. All around the country, the money has been there for the taking, and it has been taken. If the public now does what it almost never does, that is, light a match under our elected representatives, if Americans demand an end to the theft and stiff prosecution of the wrongdoers, whether in and out or out of government, we can be a nation on the mend. The question will then become, how do you rid the system of all the waste, fraud, and mismanagement that has evolved over the years due to this callous disregard?
So, Jerry, you don't believe the current crop of solutions today's reformers are proposing will do any lasting good? Why not?
It is pointless to try to attack the massive waste, fraud, and abuse in the thousands of programs that offer financial assistance to the nation's needy, or to the multitude of non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, that lobby for funds with which to stock and distribute goods and services for their respective beneficiaries. Think of it. Doge represented a valiant effort to cut the waste and fraud. It has been credited with cutting a little more than $200 billion from the 2025 fiscal budget. Donald Trump's tariffs netted another 200 billion or so in 2025. Only federal spending is expanding by roughly $1 trillion, a lot more than the $400 billion Doge saved and Trump's tariffs brought in. Current efforts would merely whittle down a small portion of the anticipated annual debts that cause the national debt, the indebtedness of the country, to rise year after year. Now, others say the booming economy that will flow from the reconciliation bill, the big, beautiful bill Congress passed in 2025, that will enable the country to grow its way out of its debt. That is wishful thinking. There is no safe way to pay for a runaway welfare state. That is the trap we have inadvertently sprung on ourselves.
You told me that you want to discuss a radical, in fact, revolutionary plan to set America's fiscal house in order. You say over time, your plan could cut federal spending by 75% or more without eliminating any essential services. How is that possible?
It's time the American people ask themselves, how limited was limited government meant to be? What must government do for us? And what must we, the people, be allowed and expected to do for ourselves and one another? My answer is extremely simple. Make government what it was meant to be, a protector, not a provider. All we really need from government is the protection services it can offer. Let us have, one, a national defense, that is, military forces no nation will dare threaten or assault. Two, honest, efficient law enforcement agencies to keep the peace within the country. Three, incorruptible civil and criminal court justices. And four, strong penal institutions to keep people who belong in them behind bars. Do that, and the people will handily take care of themselves. Contrary to all left-wing propaganda, Americans are not helpless. They are resourceful, resilient, and above all, independent. Remove the political shackles, such as the reams of regulations that burden them and the stiff tax levies that are imposed on them, and people will take care of themselves. The vast majority of Americans are able, productive souls, fully capable of making it on their own, maybe with a little help from family and friends, but essentially on their own. Over time, that will allow us to cut spending, federal spending, by 75% without eliminating any essential services. The essential services are the government services that protect us in our life, liberty, health, and possessions. I am not proposing cuts to Social Security or Medicare at this time. That can be discussed much later. These are programs to which recipients paid in all their working lives and to which they overwhelmingly feel entitled. And while Social Security and Medicare represent the largest portion of the federal budget, far outstripping national defense, there are plenty of other spending programs that can be targeted first.
I understand you support your, some would say, radical proposal with a wide range of arguments. What are they?
First, I want everyone to know that I am not advocating for a lookout for number one, dog eat dog, survival of the fittest, antisocial battlefield. Sometimes that's how my kind of position is falsely portrayed. People can and should treat each other with dignity, with benevolence, with generosity, and with goodwill. Certainly, no one ought to harm another in his or her life, health, liberty, or possessions. John Locke said that. But tens of millions of Americans are destitute, hungry, homeless, and in need of health care. They all qualify for SNAP benefits, that is food stamps, housing assistance, medical attention, you name it. However, if they had to, so many are fully able to care for themselves. They are the able-bodied, working age poor, and they are everywhere. They don't work, so they qualify and are, quote unquote, entitled to public assistance. Tell me, why should an able-bodied, working age man or woman in America be made to support those able-bodied, working age men and women who simply choose not to work? In any generation, I believe there are painfully few individuals who generally cannot care for themselves, and many of them choose to be as independent as they can, nevertheless. Never mind the universe of social welfare. What's with corporate welfare? In a true laissez-faire free market economy, government neither regulates and impedes nor promotes and subsidizes or finances private enterprise. Yet today, in fact, from the country's very origins, government has been giving subsidies, protective tariffs, land grants, every manner of help to our free market enterprises. That is not freedom. That can be stopped. In other words, all the lobbyists in Washington can be sent packing. They don't need to plead or beg for the assistance government is able to give them at taxpayer expense. The Constitution, it is true, guarantees every American the right to petition government for a redress of grievances. To petition government for a redress of grievances. But pleading for special subsidies, favors, exemptions, and immunities is not that. It is not a petition to government for a redress of grievances. No one is entitled to anything someone has to pay for. In other words, if all are created equal, as the Declaration of Independence declares, none are entitled to anything someone else will have to pay for. Again, without touching Social Security or Medicare, we can be well on the way to freeing ourselves and succeeding generations from financial bondage.
In both life and business, knowing when enough is enough. Lao Tzu once said, "He who knows that enough is enough will always have enough." This ancient wisdom highlights the power of simplicity. In search engine optimization, overloading a page with keywords or plugins can ruin performance. Knowing when to stop is crucial. Simplicity ranks better on Google and in life. Embrace moderation for success.
That sounds crazy. Are you saying we should let Americans die in their unheated tenements or starve for lack of food and to be denied necessary medical attention? Do you expect society to just ignore the needy?
Nothing of the sort, Vlad. To the contrary, Americans, the freest and most prosperous, are also the most generous and caring people to ever people the planet. In a free and prosperous society, there will always be sufficient benevolence, generosity, and goodwill to care for those remarkably few who cannot care for themselves. In a free and prosperous society, a little giving is no sacrifice. I have on my desk a volume called The Almanac of Philanthropy, The Almanac of American Philanthropy. It lists thousands of charities, philanthropies, organizations, and institutions that offer assistance to worthy individuals and causes all year long. Think of the good works done by St. Jude's Hospital for Children, where no family gets a bill for treatment, travel, food, or accommodations. Think of the Shriners Hospital for Children or the Tunnel to Towers organization that gives fully functioning mortgage-free homes to severely wounded soldiers and finds suitable shelter for thousands of homeless vets all around the country. In this country, we honor and revere those who care for the least amongst us. Even burly NFL football players are honored for the good they do for their communities. They are awarded with the title of Football Player of the Year, Man of the Year.
So you think that without all the entitlements, that Americans would be able to fend for themselves and live well? We'll have to leave that up to the audience whether they share your optimism. So do you have any additional objections to social welfare?
Yes, a big one. Welfare harms most the very people it purports to help. Welfare traps individuals in an effort-free wonderland of stigmatized indigence. Every incentive to be productive, to prosper, is denied the hapless welfare recipient. Every day is a repeat of every other day. There is no incentive to be productive, to lift oneself up and aspire to become prosperous and productive. That doesn't help anyone, and no one has ever gotten wealthy on welfare except the crooks.
So before you said that we should make government what it was meant to be, a protector, not a provider. How can you determine what the government was originally meant to be?
That is the kind of country that most of the founding fathers hoped to construct. I did my PhD dissertation on the intellectual and ideological foundations of the American founding era. The book that was published, you have a copy of that right to your side, is called Locke in America. That's the philosopher, the English philosopher, John Locke. The subtitle of the book is The Moral Philosophy of the Founding Era. It was published in 1995. It is still very much in print and available on Amazon. That was the period from 1760 to the Jeffersonian Revolution of 1800 that sought to rein in Alexander Hamilton's expansive political powers that the government took on. Now, in the next episode, I'm going to describe the full philosophical underpinnings of the American founding era. For now, I'll leave you with two suggestive hints. One, as I just said above, if all are created equal, none are entitled to anything for which someone else will have to pay. That is logic. And two, if no individual has a right to take away or give away what belongs to another, no number of individuals should be able to confer said power on anyone else, especially their elected representatives.
All right, Jerry, thanks so much. Another great episode. Quick question for you before we leave, though. Before we end, and I encourage all our viewers and listeners to try this test as well. I want to ask you, if welfare programs actually worked as promised, why do we need more of them every single year?
We don't need more of them. We get more of them because every day in Congress, lobbyists and special interests see what Congress is giving them already, but are greedy for more benefits, more opportunities to steal money from the public treasury. That's actually what it is. And no senator or congressman basically wants to say no to the lobbyist or the special interest that is clamoring for greater benefits, greater opportunities to do more quote unquote good for the American people, because every politician depends on those same lobbyists and those same special interests to fund their future electoral campaigns. So, and that is basically why from the very beginning, from the Transcontinental Railroad, from the original subsidies that were given to domestic manufacturers to protect them from international competition. That's why the first tariffs were put on goods. So you, from beginning to end, you have more and more people. And I say this, once the nation decided that some of its citizens have a right not to go out and get, but to lobby Congress and be given, the country faced two daunting questions. Who else should be given, and how much should everyone get? There was only one answer to those two questions. The answer was politics. And as the American people withdrew into their private lives to take care of their own family's needs and all, and stop paying attention to politics, those who did pay attention to politics did the clamoring for all the new benefits that Congress gave them year after year, to the point where we have a $38 trillion national debt, and to the point where every family in America, every middle class family in America, is paying upwards of 50% of their earnings in taxes, federal, state, and local.
So, are you optimistic or pessimistic, or maybe neutral, about the possibility of us ever getting out of this mess? And if you had to answer this quickly, briefly, without getting too much into it, very basic, simple. How do we get out of this mess?
It is very simple. A nation, like a person, has free will. People can decide how they will spend their time. If Americans get enraged over today's conditions and get politically engaged, we can solve things in a hurry. If the politicians fear the people and see that the people are getting involved and are caring about the money that Congress is spending, they will change their tune, because all the lobbyists and special interests in the world will not protect a politician's job from an aroused citizenry. So, am I optimistic? I don't know. I have long said that unless the people really feel the pain of what is going on, really feel the pain and get scared, then they will come into the political arena and demand the changes that need to be made. With a $38 trillion deficit, which even liberal politicians say is unsustainable, we might be coming to that point. But as long as Americans are comfortable, as long as they think they can get away with the shenanigans that their representatives are doing, then no, I am not optimistic.
Yeah, those are some great points. Thank you. So, with that, I think we always like to end all of our episodes by pointing to a couple of resources that we've put on your Linktree. So if you go to jeromehuyler.com or you go to Jerome Huyler on Linktree, you'll see we've made it easier for someone who may not be involved politically, may feel like maybe there's not much they could do. What power do we have to influence the politicians and the government to do the right thing? Well, we've made it easier. We've put a couple of links to websites that you can go to where you can find your local representatives and their contact information and reach out to them and send them a letter, call their office, leave a message. We've even created a draft template which you can take, copy, paste, and put your own information in, your own concerns, your own questions, your own communication with your representative, fill in your contact info, and send it away. Everything is there to make it easier for people to get involved in the process. That's what we're trying to do here. One of the things that we're trying to do here in this podcast, besides educate people, right, is to help, as you said, more people get involved and our representatives know that we're paying attention and we're watching. Then human nature is likely they will then, hopefully anyway, do the right thing. And yeah, I'm not too optimistic either, but let's hope for the best. Keep our fingers crossed. Keep doing what we're doing. Hopefully we make a difference. Anything else you want to say, Jerry, before we
Vlad,
take it out?
You don't fail at something until you stop trying.
That's
as
right.
long as we are trying, as long as we have the capacity to fight, we have the ability to alter the course of human events.
If we don't try, we have zero chance.
That's right.
All right. We're paddling upstream here, but let's keep going. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to everybody who's listening, who's watching us. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this episode of the Foundations of Freedom. And again, if there's one takeaway, it's that waste, fraud, and a runaway welfare spending system that we have today, that they aren't victimless abstractions. They show up in higher taxes, in shrinking purchasing power for everyone, and a crushing debt passed on to our children, your grandchildren. When government shifts from being the protector to being the provider, the costs are borne by every ordinary American who did nothing to deserve them. If today's conversation challenged you, don't let it end there. Let it move you to action. Share this episode. Help bring an honest conversation out about welfare spending and the responsibility. Put the responsibility back into the public square. Then take the next step. Like I was saying earlier, contact your local state and federal representatives. Demand real accountability. They work for us. They are not our rulers. They represent us. Demand real limits. Demand real reform. You'll find a downloadable starter letter, as I said, and supporting resources at Jerome Huyler. That's JeromeHuyler.com. And you can Google Jerome Huyler on Linktree, or just you'll find the link on the website. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to the Rumble channel, especially Rumble, so you don't miss future episodes. Regardless of shifting platform rules or political pressure, share this with everyone who's concerned about the future we're leaving behind. And most importantly, looking forward to you all joining us on the next episode of the Foundations of Freedom podcast. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Vlad. Very well said.